Hi, my dearest of family. Today we are going to be talking about Uranus and Sedna conjunction, which is going to get exact around the 24th of May, but this aspect is going to be within orb until April 2027. So the exact conjunction is happening in May. It's very strong in June as well, and then it's going to get reactivated in December 2026 and will be very active until April 2027. Now, this is something that I have been speaking about since 2023. Because Uranus and Sedna kind of were close enough already in 2023, but it was in the sign of Taurus. Sedna has got a very um, erratic orb. So the orbital period of Sedna is approximately 11,400 years, and it tends to spend the most amount of time in the sign of Sagittarius. So when Uranus conjoins Sedna, we are witnessing very much of a macro level aspect. Uranus functions as the great awakener, the principle of sudden radical innovation, with Sedna represents the vast, the deep, often neglected dimensions of the collective unconscious. So it's something that is like the farthest reaches of our psyche and the soul. Like I said, Sedna's orbit is really vast, like 11,000 years to circle around the sun. So a conjunction with Uranus is surely a generational event that fundamentally alters how we perceive boundaries, reality, the unseen. So it's going to be a very interesting type of energy, I would say, because think of Sedna as kind of like a bridge between the immediate future and the ancient, kind of pre-verbal past, and that's Sedna. So this transit signifies a technological unconscious where the tools we build, Uranus is like AI, digital, begin to touch or channel things that were previously considered unreachable or buried in the deep psyche, something that you were not able to imagine somehow. So it really feels like it's the era of the digital unconscious. Sedna is frequently associated with that uncanny, that which is kind of alien yet strangely familiar. With Uranus in Gemini, which Gemini is a sign of intellect and data, this conjunction suggests that our relationship with information, coding, artificial intelligence will stop being purely functional and start becoming kind of like primal. So we might see a societal shift where we treat AI not just as a tool, for example, but as a living reflection of our collective deep mind. Sedna's myth is one of betrayal and abandonment, leading to her eventual command over the ocean's creatures. So she represents transformative resilience. So when Uranus touches her, it suggests that a breakthrough of this era will come through the integration of our most difficult, abandoned, or forgotten parts. So it's not just about moving forward, it is about reclaiming what was discarded and making it functional for this new world. It really feels like it's the new reality of boundaries, really. So somehow Uranus and Sedna together dissolves the illusion of distance. So as just as we are learning to communicate across, the globe, these transits ask, what happens when we communicate with deep, vast, and the unknown? So I think there's going to be a lot of discoveries made, like deep space communication or the observation of the space. The studies of the human subconscious and psyche is going to be a huge topic, and most likely it's about the redefinition what we consider human versus what we consider kind of normal in a way. So there is definitely this deep dive type of energy. These are not superficial changes. Any sudden change they make now must be kind of like rooted in that deep, perhaps something that we ignored before. It's somehow a truth serum for me. So if you try to force a change that isn't authentic to the core, then it will likely be rejected somehow. It really kind of talks to me about the aliens as well. So we might just get very fascinated by ideas or technologies that previously felt too out there or frightening, or maybe this is going to be about words connected to the aliens or kind of like a different spiritual dimension. But let me talk to you about the myth of Sedna a little bit. Excuse me, so that we can understand exactly what this archetype is about. Like I said, Sedna represents radical transformation, surely the necessities of establishing boundaries and the cost of that, or the eventual gain of that. So what really happened is that Sedna was a young woman who refused to marry, rejecting pretty much the traditional life path expected of her. Because she was expected to become a mom, she was expected to get married, and she didn't want to live that type of life. She had an individual desire to stand apart from the collective norms. Now, one day, kind of like an evil spirit came around, but in a disguise. And the father gave her away to him, and they got married. So her father forced her into a marriage, forced her into a new environment. So they moved somewhere else, but it became a struggle for her, and the daughter was very much begging her father to rescue her. And the father tried rescuing her. Once he realized what a mistake he made, he kind of sold his daughter to a evil crow spirit. And he went there in his little ship or canoe, and but this evil spirit brought a huge storm onto them. And basically, the father decided to save his own life, so he threw her overboard. And she tried clinging to the side of the boat to save herself, but the father, often described as being under the influence of fear or external pressure, cut off her fingers to force her to let go. So she was sinking, and her severed fingers transformed into this new creature, and she became the goddess of sea. So she descended to the underworld, becoming the goddess of the deep ocean. And this is when she kind of figured out what her ultimate truth was. And she gained absolute control over the creatures that provide for the survival of the people. So she wasn't just a girl anymore who was victimized. She became the sovereign of the life-giving ocean, basically. So, what do we learn from this story? Well, firstly, it represents clinging. So, what are you currently holding on to? Is that a job? Is that a belief? Is that a relationship or a past identity? Because that is somehow severing your own growth. And Uranus comes around and it tries to liberate you from that. Imagine this as a forced release. So you might want to identify a time in your life when you were forced to let go of something against your will. How did that loss ultimately create a condition for your current independence, for example? What are you holding on to that actually is destroying your life right now? What's the cost of autonomy? Where in your life are you paying a high price to maintain your independence? And is that price sustainable for you? So, because Sedna represents the deepest unconscious, she lives at the bottom of the sea where the pressure is very immense, actually. So, it somehow represents a pressure point as well. So, what area of your life do you feel the most pressure? Where is the Gemini cusp in your chart? And can you trace this back to an ignored or buried uh, moment in your life, you know? Also, she represents the unseen resources because she became someone, right? She found her true path. So, what is that talent or insight or strength that you need to be able to discover? Something that you might have neglected before. Because if you descend into your own deepest mental space, what resource would you find there? And it's potentially something that you are refusing right now to acknowledge. You know, it's also somehow the cold truth. You know, Sedna requires us to be cold and honest. So what is one truth about your current situation that you have been avoiding because it feels too cold, too harsh to kind of look at? You know, in the myth, the community survival depends on the relationship with Sedna. So if they offend her, the sea freezes and the resources vanish. There's no fish. So somehow it is also the representation of accountability. So what are you giving back to the environment? That kind of like feeds you? That could be another question that this conjunction might ask us to kind of think about it. And what are the consequences of neglect? Because when you are ignoring your own psychological neediness or depth, how does that manifest in the external world? Do you lash out? Do you withdraw? Do you become rigid, or people do those things around you as well? And in a way, Sedna represents survival instincts too. Obviously, she was clinging to the side of the boat. So, how can you shift your mindset from merely surviving, you know, kind of like staying afloat on the boat, to mastering? So, what structure do you need to build to stop feeling like a victim of your circumstances? So, with Uranus, which is the planet of invention, it really feels like it's going to be the reinvention of ourself. So, from a predictive point of view, I think there is going to be, I think we are moving away from treating technology as an external tool and we are moving towards treating it as a reflection of our collective psyche. I think it's the birth of psychology or rebirth of psychology. But, you know, we will see software interfaces that claim to know us better than we know ourselves. You know, the sadness shadow is losing our sense of individual boundary to that vast kind of like digital ocean. So using AI to map, understand, process, you know, all these type of stuff is actually super good, but what's the cost of that, you know? And this could be a major question coming up in the next 1 year. Sedna is the protector of the sea creatures. She represents the abundance of resources. So I believe there's going to be geopolitical or economic debates about resources such as oil, land, deep sea mining, genetic data, psychological profiling, and the ethics of the digital identity, really. Of course, Uranus might even represent the sky. So I think there's going to be a lot of discoveries happening, maybe new sea creatures or an abandoned, I don't know, you know, town, for example, at the bottom of the sea. Or even recently, I was reading about certain type of discoveries that they made about um, that sunk ship, well, Titanic. You know, so I'm not shocked with Uranus moving into the sign of Gemini and already within orb to Sedna. Um, I also believe that because Uranus kind of like moves fast, but Sedna is very cold, very slow. So I think it's a period of intense information overload, followed by sudden, mysterious kind of like total blackouts of systematic halts. So I'm expecting a major digital infrastructure failure which forces society to reckon with its total dependence on this iCloud and all this type of stuff. Because Uranus is about a wake-up call. So it's a wake-up call to decentralize and find self-sufficiency in something. Imagine that I know that I predicted that, for example, AI teachers are going to be assisting students, but relying on that might be taking away, the idea of us becoming even smarter because we don't use calculators anymore and all those type of stuff, right? Um, but Sedna's myth is also suggesting that we have to face the truth that was abandoned. So I think a global cultural trend towards uncovering, acknowledging, and reintegrating historical traumas that societies have tried to bury. So I can imagine discovering ancient documents, museums, archives, or government institutions will be pressured to release long-held records. It's not necessarily just a simple transparency request, really. It's more of a forced reckoning where holding on to the lie becomes more painful than the truth, what actually happened. So it feels like they are going to be actually releasing it after being kind of like asked for it. So I think sea life discoveries are very much expected, but surely certain type of um, new new planets as well, for example. Sedna spent quite a long time in the sign of Taurus. Now Sedna is going to be spending quite a long time in the sign of Gemini. So that's due to the highly eccentric orbit, like I said. Sedna has got a tendency to spend approximately 1,000 years in the sign of Sagittarius. So the reason why it is actually important is because it's now in the opposing sign. So it feels like this transition for Sedna between Taurus and Gemini is kind of like the great consolidation. And Sagittarius period is a bit more about the great release. So what I'm kind of like thinking with Sedna in Taurus, because that was the memory of the body, really. I mean, it happened between 1966 to 2023, pretty much. And, we were very focused on the material side of the world and the survival. This is really much the cold earth. So Sedna in Taurus demands that we look at what we have built physically, and it forced us to confront the environmental impact of our corruption and the physical manifestation of our historical traumas. We saw a massive focus on the body, food security, environmental conservations, the tension between economic growth and, the planetary limits of Earth. So the trauma was very physical, pollution, dietary issues, the struggle for land and resources. So with Sedna in the sign of Taurus, that ocean of unconscious is the earth itself. It's we cannot just talk our way out of a Taurus transit, right? We must act our way out. So if there is a problem, it's going to become physical. It's kind of going to create a tangible crisis. Now, with Sedna moved into the sign of Gemini, that's the called network element. And with Uranus being there, I'm kind of imagining that everyone is connecting with others over the phone or internet, which of course we have already seen. But maybe is it less and less meeting points? So we are kind of like moving from that soil into the data stream. So we are now confronting the trauma within our information system. We are seeing the rise of post-truth anxieties, the merging of human consciousness with AI, the realization that our digital footprint is new, permanent record of our collective death. The trauma is no longer just physical, actually. It is more informational. It is more mental trauma, really. So, yeah, it really kind of feels like that, the boundaries are going to be somehow changing, whether we are talking about physical boundaries between countries or travel opportunities are somehow potentially changing as well. But, we did the material audit with Uranus in Taurus as well. Like a physical habit, a material possession, a health issue, something that I have been kind of storing for, God knows, 7, 8 years. So now we have to identify that stuck material reality from that Taurus cycle, really. And then we do this informational audit. So, what story am I telling myself about the life right now? Is this story based on direct experience or based on kind of like a data, like a news, because I read something on social media, other people's opinion, and so forth? So how am I going to kill that noise? How am I going to bring that noise down? And then what is going to be that one singular truth I'm ready to kind of stake my future on in a way? So it's all about finding your personal sovereignty, really. So that's briefly what it kind of like indicates. So let's look at briefly, very, very briefly, the 12 signs. So Aries rising sign, this is happening in your third house, the house of communication and environment. So your local environment and the way you process information are about to change or undergo quite a radical reboot. You may find that normal kind of like daily conversations feels shallow. You are being pushed to speak truth that have been buried deep in your psyche. Be careful with how you express data or news in your local circle. A certain type of uncanny insights can flow you through, but ensure they are grounded before you hit any type of send. Taurus risings, and this is happening in your second house. So the way you define value is shifting from more towards an informational matter rather than a material one. So you might find that old income streams or rigid traditional methods of making money suddenly feels kind of obsolete. So you're being asked to find the hidden value in your skill set, the things you thought were useless or buried. It's kind of going back to a talent of yours that you used to utilize before, but now maybe you are not. So it really feels like it's a time for a total restructuring of your assets based on a deep, authentic self-worth and not just based on external validation. Gemini rising sign, this is happening in your first house. Of course, this is a huge focal point for you. Your entire identity is undergoing an upgrade. The way you present yourself, your style, your very persona are shifting to the integrate that deep ancestral truth that you have long suppressed. So you may feel like a completely new version of yourself is kind of booting up, basically. The challenge is that managing that sheer amount of data about who you are, and then we can get lost a little bit. So just might be mindful about that. You have to be focusing on the truth rather than the noise around you. Cancer rising sign, it's happening in your 12th house, and that's the house of unconscious and pretty much the retreat. So it looks like you are in a deep dive phase. That uncanny aspect of sadhana are going to be very present in your dream life or even in your private meditations. This is not necessarily a time when you need to be forcing results in the public eye. Instead, you can use this transit to excavate old, like dormant emotional patterns. It's the maintenance of your soul, really. For you, Leo rising sign, this is happening in your 11th house. That's the house of aspiration. So the way you connect with your tribe is changing. Old, stale, professional networks might suddenly sever, being replaced by groups that deal in radical, future forward, or kind of like esoteric knowledge. I think you are being asked to lead through vision, not just popularity. And somehow your community is becoming an extension of your own deep mind. Obviously, choose carefully who you align with because they are also reflecting your internal evolution as well. For Virgo rising sign, this is happening in the 10th house, the house of career. It's like rewriting your career script. So you might even feel this sudden urge to pivot your career reputation towards something more authentic, something less traditional. You know, you are moving from a standard career matrix toward towards a path that aligns with your deeper, perhaps previously ignored soul purpose. So don't be afraid if your public image suddenly shifts or kind of feels alien to your past self because you are going to be building a new legacy, most likely, and that is going to be feeling more aligned with your true self. Libra rising sign, this is happening in your ninth house, the house of higher education, long distance travel, philosophy. So it's kind of like your belief systems are being hacked, but in the best possible way, though. So all dogmas, inherited ways of thinking, um, they are going to be upended by sudden radical insights. You are being pushed to develop your own deeply personal philosophy rather than following the crowds. It's an invitation to travel really far away places or to study something super esoteric or to explore the questions of destiny, really, but from a different uh, perspective profoundly different from your previous academic and intellectual pursuits. It's kind of like dropping out of school. Let's say I have studied, engineering, and then all of a sudden I want to become a tarot reader. So it's a huge shift. Scorpio rising sign, this is happening in your eighth house, the house of shared resources and power. So this is the reinvention of your power. It's about you tapping into that subconscious power you have potentially not been aware of. This is a very powerful placement, actually, because you are being asked to audit the shared aspects of your life, such as partnerships, investments, psychological debts. It's like you discovering deep-seated truth about power dynamics that has been buried for years. So you can use this energy to severe toxic entanglement and basically reclaim your personal sovereignty. That's why you have to be gathering your strength. Sagittarius rising sign. So this conjunction is hitting your seventh house, the house of committed partnership. So it might be a radical shift in how you relate to the other person. People who come into your life now will act as mirrors for your deepest, most repressed parts. And if a partnership feels like it's suddenly breaking or changing, it's because the old foundation no longer supports your evolution. So some of you might experience certain type of departure of relationships, or it's about meeting someone on a soul level. And I kind of feel like this is a meeting point that you would never expect, or I would never go to that or for that type of person somehow. Capricorn rising sign, this is happening in your sixth house. So your daily grind is being re-engineered, really. So the way you handle health or schedule or the service you provide to others is actually undergoing a massive update. You might find that your old rigid routines aren't working anymore. And Sedna is asking you to bring this deep consciousness to your daily life. So it's kind of stop sleepwalking through your tasks. It's about implementing systems that allow you to work with this energy, not necessarily against it. Aquarius rising sign, this is happening in your fifth house, the house of romance and play and staging and taking risks. So it's a massive injection of your creative electricity. I think your art, your passion, the way you express yourself are moving into more of an uncharted territory. I think you become this new kind of channel for creativity that feels both ancient and futuristic as well. It's like reinventing a creative product that was used in the past, but now I'm going to put my unique spin on it. And it says, don't censor your ideas because they seem too out there. You know, your job now is to bring these radical, deep insights into a form that others can see or can experience. And Pisces rising sign, this conjunction is landing in your fourth house, the house of home, family, and roots. So it feels like that you're doing this very deep level of archaeology on your own foundation, family secrets, ancestral patterns, the very concept of home are being brought to the surface. So you might feel this need to move, to redefine your domestic space, or to finally resolve a generational pattern in your life. It's about having to stabilize your internal foundation so you can stand firm while the rest of the world actually navigates the external, chaos around them. So everyone, remember Uranus-Sedna conjunction is not a quick fix. It's a long-term rewrite of your kind of like operating system. Regardless of your rising sign, the strategy is the same. Stop ignoring the buried parts of your story. When you integrate that deep, raw truth with that technological, fast moving energy of Uranus, you become unstoppable. And if you are tracking this transit for yourself, pay attention to the houses I mentioned. This is where the revolution is happening. And another important factor is that make sure that you have subscribed for my next breakdown because you can most likely benefit a lot from it. So thank you for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Take care. Bye bye.